Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're opening with, well, one of the most staggering real-life ethical choices you could imagine, made by a small community facing just unimaginable terror.
Yeah, it's intense. We are diving deep into Geraldine Brooks's novel Year of Wonders. It's a fictionalized account, but based on the very real village of Iam during the plague year of 1665 to 66.
And we've got a whole range of sources, excerpts, reviews, author notes to give you a real shortcut to understanding not just the history, which is fascinating in itself, but the moral and emotional crisis at the heart of it all.
Right. The big question Brooks tackles is, what really happens to faith, to the social order, even just to the human heart, when a whole village decides consciously to sacrifice itself for the greater good?
And we see all this whole tragedy unfold through the eyes of one person mainly, Anna Frith. She's our anchor. A simple maid, but her journey of survival, courage, and, well, intellectual awakening is often called Brooks's most wondrous touch.
And is absolutely key. She really embodies that theme of resilience. She starts off quite subordinate, almost invisible in some ways, and by the end, she's this truly independent, thinking woman.
Her perspective gives us that vital contrast, doesn't it, to the male power structures, the religious dominance in the village at the start.
Exactly. Okay, so let's get into the core decision. The historical crucible, as you called it. The sources make it really clear. The villagers face this stark choice: flee and risk spreading the plague across northern England.
Or stay. Seal themselves in, knowing full well it probably meant death for many, if not most of them.
And this was a massive act of collective will. It wasn't just giving up. It was an active choice, really pushed by the rector, Michael Montpellier. He convinced them to quarantine the village.
They even formalized it, right? The Sunday Oath.
Yeah, the Sunday Oath. They basically agreed that the village boundaries would become our whole world. Imagine that.
It's almost incomprehensible, that level of sacrifice. And you have to remember, this was a largely Puritan community. They were already primed to see sickness as, well, a sign from God, often punishment.
Which meant Montpellier had to be incredibly persuasive, a master order, really, to convince them to effectively sign their own death warrant.
How did he manage that? What was his argument?
Well, it was brilliant in a way. He didn't try to dismiss their beliefs. He used them. He framed the plague not as punishment for sin, not directly anyway, but as a fiery furnace.
A furnace.
To do what?
To refine them, like ore being melted down to get the pure metal. He was saying the suffering wasn't pointless. It was meant to purify their souls. He even used this analogy of a farmer plowing under a ruined crop, accepting that loss, but hoping for a better harvest next season.
Wow, that's quite a rhetorical feat. He's tapping right into their religious anxieties, but twisting the meaning toward sacrifice, not just punishment.
Exactly, redefining God's will for them. But the cost, it became real, terrifyingly fast. The sources mention a grim milestone pretty early on.
You do.
Yeah.
By the second Sunday in June, it was already devastating, 180 dead. Which meant, and this quote is chilling, as many of us were now in the ground as walked above it.
Half the village gone in weeks. That kind of loss. It must have shaken everything. Not just grief, but the whole social fabric Montpellier was trying to hold together.
Absolutely. And that shared sacrifice immediately threw existing inequalities into sharp relief.
You mean who was really willing to commit?
Precisely. The quarantine becomes this sharp commentary on class and leadership. You have Montpellier, the educated man of God, choosing to stay and likely die with his flock.
And then you have the local gentry, the Bradfords.
Right. Colonel Bradford and his family. They prioritize their own safety, their property. They flee almost immediately.
And Bradford's justification is just ice cold.
It really is. He talks about safeguarding what is mine and then dismisses the villagers left behind, saying they have no choice anyway. It's incredibly callous.
It shows that wealth might buy you an escape route, but maybe not moral courage.
Brooks makes that point very strongly. The plague doesn't care about class, but the powerful still try to use their privilege to sidestep its reach.
Now, Montpellier himself, he's based on a real historical figure, William Maupassant, who was seen as a hero. But Brooks deliberately gives her, Michael Montpellier, a darker side. Why do that? Why complicate the hero?
I think it's crucial for making him believable. He avoids being just a plaster saint. Think about it. A man who can persuade a whole village to embrace likely death. That kind of intense conviction, it has to come from somewhere deep, maybe somewhere almost frightening.
So the charisma needed for that kind of leadership might also have a destructive edge.
Brooks suggests is exactly that.
Hmm.
His powerful faith, his ability to inspire, it seems tied to this capacity for almost terrifying conviction. It hints at something potentially unhealthy driving him.
Like that fine line between absolute moral certainty and a kind of destructive zeal.
Yes, we see flashes of it, don't we? His terrible rage when the Bradfords flee, and later, his complete breakdown, that fit in his room after Eleanor dies.
So, is Brooks hinting that maybe extreme selflessness, that level of sacrifice, can sometimes mask something self-destructive, or at least deeply troubled?
I think that's a fair reading. His capacity for good is tangled up with this intense, sometimes explosive inner life. It makes him far more complex than just the hero rector, and it helps us understand his later actions, especially concerning his wife Eleanor. He's deeply flawed.
Speaking of flawed humanity, this brings us back to Anna Frith. She goes through just one catastrophe after another, and this really seems to be the fire that shapes her, that forces her spiritual change.
Her losses are just relentless. First, her husband Sam dies not from the plague, interestingly, but in a mine accident. It reminds you death was always present, even before the plague.
Right, and then the plague does hit her family.
Horribly. Both her young sons, Tom and Jamie. Jamie's death is particularly brutal and comes after this brief, hopeful period, this kind of sunlit autumn where it seemed like maybe things were getting better. Losing him just strips away everything conventional in her life.
But that emptiness, that stripping away, it creates space for something else, for her to grow intellectually.
Yes, exactly. And this is where her bond with Eleanor Montpelion becomes so important. Eleanor teaches her to read. Think about what that means for a woman of her station in the 17th century. It opens up a whole new world.
And they start studying together practical things.
They do. They delve into old texts like Avicenna's Canon of Medicine. They're looking for real remedies, herbs to help nettle for the blood, starwort for the lungs. It's knowledge as an act of defiance against just sitting there in despair.
And this practical knowledge, this focus on the physical world, seems to fuel her biggest shift, rejecting the standard Puritan explanation for the plague. That's a huge step.
It really is the core of her liberation, philosophically. She moves away from that binary view the one Montpelion preaches, that sickness is either a test from God or it's the devil's work. Anna starts to see it differently. She comes to believe the plague is, well, a thing in nature merely. Just that. A biological force, something happening in the physical world, not necessarily a direct moral judgment from on high.
That sounds almost like proto-Enlightenment thinking, moving towards observation away from pure theology.
Precisely. It's her path to self-liberation. She
Yeah.
starts thinking that, okay, yes, maybe you contemplate God, but you also need to spend time thinking as to how the plague spread and poisoned our blood.
Focusing on the how, not just the why.
Exactly. And that shift lets her move from being a passive sufferer to an active resistor, someone seeking practical solutions. It puts her on the path to becoming a healer herself.
But while Anna's on this internal journey, the village itself is kind of falling apart under the pressure. Fear starts to turn ugly.
Oh, absolutely. The pressure cooker boils over, and we see scapegoating rear its head, especially aimed at the village healers, the Gowdy women.
Mem and Annie's Gowdy, they represented a different kind of knowledge, didn't they?
Yes, traditional folk wisdom, herb knowledge, which was effective sometimes, but it always made them outsiders, viewed with suspicion. In Eam's rigid Puritan world, if you could heal sickness, weren't you interfering with God's will? That made them vulnerable.
Dangerous thinking.
Very. It positioned them perfectly to be labeled witches when fear took over.
And Annie's Gowdy, particularly. She stands out as this figure of radical independence.
Annie's is amazing, tragic, but so strong. She consciously chooses her own way, refuses to conform. She famously says she prefers her freedom over becoming any man's chattel.
Which, in that time and place, was incredibly radical.
Hugely radical. For a woman's identity to not be defined by her father or husband, unthinkable for most. She wanted her life to have variety, like a garden with more than just one plant in it.
But the very independence makes her a target when the hysteria peaks.
Yes, she's murdered, accused of witchcraft, of lying with the devil, during this wave of panicked scapegoating. It's horrific, but it shows how quickly that moral courage Montpelion tried to instill just dissolves into mob fear when things get desperate enough.
A dark mirror, maybe, to Montpelion's own intense conviction. His saved the towns around them, but the villagers' desperate conviction killed Ennia's.
That's a great way to put it. The extreme circumstances just amplified everything, the best and the worst in people.
Okay, so as the village is hitting this low point, we get the big revelation, the secret about Montpelion and Eleanor, and it suddenly makes his intense commitment, his almost obsessive drive for the quarantine, make a different kind of sense.
Yes, this is a major turning point. We learn Eleanor confessed something to Michael before they married, a great sin. An elopement, premarital sex, and a stillborn child resulted from it.
A huge scandal, if known,
Right.
but Montpellion's reaction wasn't rejection.
No. He chose to, well, love her through it, but in a very specific way.
Yeah.
He saw her as needing expiation atonement. He dedicated their marriage to that.
Expiation, that implies a heavy need for purification, self-punishment almost, in that 17th century context.
Exactly. So their marriage became this shared act of spiritual service. He loved her deeply, the text says, but crucially, he never lay with her. Their entire married life was dedicated to service and sacrifice, a way to, in his mind, cleanse that past sin.
Wow. So the quarantine, he wasn't just asking the village to sacrifice. He'd already imposed this immense personal sacrifice on himself and on Eleanor for years.
Precisely. That secret context explains the intensity, the almost superhuman self-control he exhibits, and the sheer fervor behind his leadership in Ayam.
But when Eleanor dies, that scaffolding just collapses.
Completely. He is utterly broken. And it's in that shared rock bottom, that absolute despair, that the brief, intense, and painful affair with Anna happens.
Right there on the floor amidst all the death and grief.
It's raw, a desperate reaching for human connection when both of them have lost almost everything. It's not planned, it's not sustainable, it's just this explosion of shared grief and Montpellion's complete loss of that iron self-control he'd maintained for Eleanor.
But the novel doesn't leave Anna there, in that broken place. Her story pushes forward. There's a final act of courage, driven by, well, unexpected villainy.
Yes, Elizabeth Bradford returns. And in a truly shocking moment, she tries to drown her own newborn half-sister, the baby, resulting from Anna's affair with Montpelion.
Why? Just pure spite and shame.
To protect the family name, to erase the evidence of the affair and Montpellion's fall. Anna saves the baby, but she knows instantly she has to run. Elizabeth won't let her live, knowing the truth.
So Anna flees Eyam, but not just Eyam.
No, she flees England entirely. She makes this incredible journey across the sea to Oran in North Africa. Talk about resilience. She's taking this baby, this constant reminder of loss and risk, and choosing to give her a future.
And she finds a new life, a new purpose there?
Completely. She names the baby Eleanor, after her friend and teacher, but calls her Aisha, which means life. And in Oran, Anna finds her true calling as a healer, a midwife. She's no longer the overlooked maid. People know her as, Jamie, mother of Jamie, channeling her grief for her lost son into helping others.
She became, as the book says, tempered and made strong, forged in that fire Montpelion talked about, but in her own way.
Exactly. She rides out of Eyam, not broken, but reborn into a new, self-determined destiny.
So this deep dive really shows how Brooks uses that historical horror as a crucible. It tests everything: faith, class, leadership, love, grief. We see hypocrisy, yes, but also incredible courage.
And Anna's story is just this powerful testament to the human spirit's ability to endure, adapt, and even find a radical kind of freedom after being pushed to the absolute limit. Sometimes survival means leaving it all behind.
Before we wrap up, we want to leave you with one final thought, something to maybe chew on from the sources.
Yeah, think about this description. Late in the book, after the affair, Anna reflects on Michael Montpelion. She notes his hand felt like the hard hand of a laboring man, rather than the limp white paw of a priest.
Now remember, Montpelion was a scholar, a rector. He wasn't out mining coal or plowing fields.
So why would Anna, the person who knew him perhaps most intimately at his lowest point, describe his hands that way? What kind of intense internal labor, spiritual, emotional, was he doing? The digging graves, yes, but also the constant wrestling with faith, guilt, control. What made his hands feel so callous to her?
What kind of internal work wears a soul down, like physical labor wears down the body? Something to mull over until our next deep dive. Thanks for listening.